Hello and welcome to another episode of Scions of the Southland. As always, my name is Akshay Ishwaran, and joining me from the beautiful city of Atlanta, Georgia, is a man who always appreciates the Pro Bowl, Mr. Jake Grant. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Oh, I'm doing fine and dandy. I've gotten 2/3 of the way through one heat transfer problem today, so I guess you can call it productive.
I don't
Uh,
miss the student life, I gotta say. I really don't.
Dude, the curly does and the straight up and down D's of differentiation are all running together. So I think it is time to quit that and just think about sports for 40 minutes. How's that?
Sounds like a plan. And I mean, boy, looking at our shot sheet here, we got a lot to talk about. We got swim was in action, track and golf. Women's tennis is still rocking and rolling. Men's tennis, I think, is still in action as we speak in Auburn right now. And then we have some casual other schedule updates down the line. So let's put where's my timer here? Let's put our usual 30-ish minutes on the clock and get started. What say you?
Lay it on me. Let's go.
All right. Three, two, one. Here we go. Let's start with your favorite neck of the woods, the swim and dive team. They faced off versus Gardner-Webb. Tell us what happened.
Yeah. Well, shout out the diving for doing FSU and Miami both Friday and Saturday, but I think the main event is always senior day because much like you think about the homecoming game in football, you try and schedule an event you can win on senior day, and that the Yellow Jackets did. The men topped Gardner-Webb 183-94, and the women 190-78. Those results really never would have or should have been in doubt. But sadly, that takes away my favorite talking point about the men, in which they were probably the best no-win team in the country until this week. But they've looked very good all year, and both teams, I guess you could say, uh, thrashed their opponents.
But
I mean,
also Gardner-Webb.
yeah,
The
I mean,
caveat is Gardner-Webb, yeah.
and it's an important caveat because these aren't. It's not like they just went up to Athens or out to Auburn and thrashed top 25 team. They thrashed a team that's frankly not very good. But a win's a win, and I think the headline of the day, especially if you follow the social media for the team, is that Cameron Hidalgo platform record, and that gives her all three of the women's team diving records: 1 meter, 3 meter, and platform. So. Yeah, I guess you could say looking pretty good on the boards. I think this isn't too much of a statement to say that she could be the goat of Tech women's diving. So there
I
you
mean, if
go.
you hold all the records, I'm inclined to agree personally.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really much better you can do, and in Tech's history, it's a relatively young program. It's not like we can point to some it was 1940 and the sport was different kind of thing like you can kind of do with football, you know. But yeah, no, we kind of know that, you know, Kaio, Christian on the men's side are two of the best swimmers Tech has ever had on the men's, but not really. It's kind of hard to place them in the exact grand scheme of things. But with this diving, it seems a little bit more clear cut.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's
Let's move.
that's pretty on swim though. So
Yeah, I was just about to say, you caught me right mid transition. Let's move on over to track. Some say the on land version of swim. I see you have written here strong showing in distance events, and they had some field events this weekend. Where were they at?
they were up in Clemson again. Again, I guess might get a little bit dull, but it's a very easy trip. They have a nice facility, and I guess it's a last hurrah for the men for a team that they've ran against for years and years and years. Clemson is shutting down its men's track and cross country teams, which is a tragedy. But you always hate to see an Olympic sport go. But the men had some good showings. They also did. They also did have some 200-meter dash and was I going to say? There's another sprint event. We don't usually do sprint events all that. I'm not going to say all that well, but I mean, hurdles are all right. But our track team makes its money in the 3,000 and other distance events as well as the jumps. So yeah, they stayed true to form. So.
Let's move on over to golf, which is not a on land version of swim. So I heard that they were out in Hawaii. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. First off, can confirm it's not on land swimming because I am awful, absolutely awful at it. But they were out at the Southwestern Invitational out in Southern California. They're playing a bunch of California teams plus Louisville, ETSU. So yeah, pretty good field, but definitely a California flair to it. And they came in 7th out of about 12 teams, which is
Merp.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not terrible. Could have probably seen some stronger showings on the day, but again, it's a very young team. The I guess biggest veteran presence, Noah Norton, was and that 5th guy for last year's team. So that kind of shows you what they're working with. In golf, the top 4 scorers or the top 4 entries score, and then you have a 5th scoreable entry, and then sometimes Tech will carry individuals. Tech's individual, Bartley Forrester, did pretty solid.
Might I add, future Cobb Community Commissioner Bartley Forrester.
True. If he would have been in the scoring lineup, I think that might have changed the calculus just a little bit, but not enough to move us up or down a place. But I will note Luka Karalik and Will Dixon looking pretty good for young names we haven't seen a lot of. And then Connor Howe had a decent showing as the week wound down. Pretty sure they're taking the same team out to Hawaii this week. So hopefully, each step builds on it. And I will note the weather Monday and Wednesday was not awesome. It was cold, windy.
They noted that on the TV broadcast too.
Yeah. On Wednesday, they moved it up because the weather was supposed to get bad enough early enough that it was, not great for golf. But Karalik is a sophomore. Didn't see a lot of playing time last year. I mean, obviously it was a short season, so we'll take what we can get. I think. I'm not going to be not that I'm not going to ride this team hard, but they are a very young team. It's a little bit unrealistic to ask for them to, 3 or 4-peat the ACC, I think, given that they just lost 2 amateur champions in 1 year. Like that is an unfathomable deficit that I don't think any coach has ever had to face before. So there you go.
I don't know. I have high expectations for all my programs, as always, personally.
I just want to see growth. That's my ask for Georgia
Hey,
Tech.
reasonable expectations are not allowed on this podcast.
All right, so you want to talk about our impending national champion women's basketball team then, or no?
We can talk about our impending national champion women's tennis team first, if that's okay with you.
Let's do that. That's fine.
Okay, women's tennis, our new favorite sport and our new official podcast sport. They are absolutely wrecking teams, and it is fun to watch. Other than the one minor scare versus UAB that we, I don't remember if that came up before or after we recorded the other day, or it was during the midweek, but it was an interesting little scare there, where I think one of our models in-house had Tech with 99% win probability the entire time, despite UAB leading on a couple courts for most of the singles.
With already 2 points under their belt too.
Yeah, so. It was a tricky one. It was a tricky one, but they did get past KSU earlier this week and Auburn earlier today without breaking a sweat, really. And next up for them is ITA indoors. So You're the local tennis expert, so you tell me a little bit about how these indoors work.
I was going to say, I don't think I'm even the biggest tennis expert in our tech sports group chat, but I do my best here. ITA indoors, if you were following along the weekend before last, Georgia Tech hosted kickoff weekend, as we do somewhat often, and had Duke and a couple other schools in town. Duke was ranked number 6, and we knocked them off in the kickoff weekend finale, and that earned us a slot in the ITA indoors. This is an annual event. Usually it's 16 teams. This time it's 8 teams. So Georgia Tech could play up to 3 matches if everything breaks right, but the field is pretty stacked. So we will see how the seeding works out. But given the teams that have won their matches, that would be number 1, North Carolina, number 2, UCLA, number 3, Texas, number 5, Pepperdine.
Pepperdine.
6,
They'll get you
Pepperdine.
for that one. It's Pepperdine.
Dude, I had a friend play volleyball for Pepperdine, men's volleyball, and I still say it wrong. I'm a bad person. It's fine.
Hey, you said
10,
it, not me.
I was going to say 9 and 10 are both OSUs, the Ohio and Oklahoma versions, and then 13 is Northwestern. These rankings came out last week, so I don't know if that's how they'll be seeding them, but I haven't seen a draw yet, so presumably we'll play Pep on Friday. But who's to say, really? Who's to say?
Really?
North Carolina is a very good team. UCLA and Texas up there, too. So no matter what, we're about to be running into some tough stuff, but we'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be an interesting tournament, if for nothing else other than, this is the first real look against – I mean, it's the second real look that Tech will get against high quality competition, especially early on in this season. They had the match versus Duke. They had a match versus, I want to say it was South Carolina. I'm really bad with the calendar. But after that, they've faced, I mean, Auburn is it's a Power 5 team. They're usually tough. Kennesaw, UAB, but this is sort of are they national contenders? And can they get this done in the tournament later on this spring? This is really your test, I think.
Yeah, even if we don't win the first, I said this last time we made it to indoors. I think it might have been two or 3 years ago, because we went to the Final
17.
Four.
It was the same year as this Final Four, so it was 17.
2018.
18.
Yeah. So 2018, we had a very good year, a very good team, and it was just one of those, okay, they weren't this good. Like, they're good the year before, but they weren't, top 8, well, I guess it was easier to make it back then, but they weren't quite as good as they are now, or as they would prove to be later in the year. Just getting more reps against a great team is going to go a long way, especially for a team like Georgia Tech women's tennis. And we've seen in the past week that they're still a young team, right? They're super talented, and they have some great senior and veteran pieces in Vicky Flores and Kenya Jones. But really, we don't know how the rest is going to shake up, and just getting them good reps. The Duke match, great example. They locked down, they grew. It was a great finish to a great match, and again, they won as our friend Ethan Kreger, formerly a co-host, would say, the super duper tiebreaker. 2 days in a row, that's pretty good for a young team. But then again, you're just getting reps. You want some quality opponents. It's the same logic behind going, all right, I'm not mad that swimming didn't beat Bama in the middle of the regular season. I'm not mad that they didn't beat Auburn in the middle of the regular season. Women's tennis, I won't be mad if they go in there and lose to, Pepperdine, Texas, Ohio State in the first round. But the more they win, obviously the closer they get to title and the ability to hang a banner and whatnot. But the more they win, the more reps they get, and that will only pay off positively when it becomes June and NCAA season, which, I mean, the ITA is a great tournament and it's still a national championship, but I think more of the general populace kind of pays attention to those NCAA titles. So if it gets us more ready for that, then I think that's all for the best.
Agreed. So let's flip over to the other tennis team, the men, who swept Kennesaw twice, and then they also swept Auburn earlier today. That sort of ties into the same thing that you're saying. They got more reps. They're getting better. They're gelling. They're learning how to sort of handle these competitions. But this isn't as young of a team, if I remember correctly. And they're about to face a bit of a buzzsaw as well.
Yeah, well, see, the interesting part about that is for a team that needs pretty similar things to the women, the men, they were on campus last year, but they didn't get a full season. They got the MLK weekend, they got in February, but for all intents and purposes, they're still pretty green, and getting even another chance at UGA and Carolina, South Carolina, the not real Carolina, is only going to do them better for it, I think. We saw them play UGA better than they have in quite some time, like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whenever MLK weekend was. And I think that will, we can use it as somewhat of a barometer, but the one I'm really going to circle is South Carolina at home. They've been promoting it, so hopefully it's outside. If they're promoting it to students as a thing you can do and go to. And hey, if they win that, that's hey, look, they did get better. Or if they're closer, it's, hey, look, they're playing a quality team as stronger as they were last month, last year, etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I hate justifying the losses as, oh, it's okay for some teams and oh, it's not for others. But I think you fundamentally, like, even saying that about women's tennis, they're a great team. They are going to go far and they're so young. So that's one thing. The men, they need to get those reps in, and I'd rather see them at least take a chance than not at all,
I think I know when we talk about football and we talk about the NFL, it's sort of that title window, right?
Yep.
It's the concept of being able to compete within an amount of time. I think with the men, we've been seeing them be at some of their highest talent levels, but at older average ages the last couple of years, and especially as we get into this last year and this year. With the women, they are younger, their window is longer. With the men, they are older, their window is shorter. So we hold each to a different standard, I think, is sort of the long version of what you're saying.
I think you could see it like that, but I was more going for and your logic works, and I think compared to us railing on men's basketball shouldn't have lost to UVA, Duke,
We're
whatever.
getting there. We're getting there.
We'll get to. And I think that logic applies in that scenario for sure, but it's just very interesting. Like, I'm not worried about swimming not beating every opponent on the schedule as long as they're getting in good reps, because, like, it not that it doesn't matter in the same way, but, like, the women's team is going to pick up the wins somewhere. Just get them in front of the best competition and get them better. The men's team still needs to grow. Just we need to see progress, and I think that's more of what I was going for, and that it's weird to just be like okay with that. Whereas, in a say men's basketball again, or even baseball, with as high as those expectations have been, like, it's winning time, there, and that's the expectation,
Mm-hmm. No, I totally understand where you're going with that. It's just I'm still partial to to the window theory, right? Because you're saying it's winning time for the men now, but the women have a little bit more tail, like a little bit more of a little bit more time, just in general.
Yep.
Until like it's really crunch time. Anyway,
well,
I'm repeating myself.
I was going to say, I want to say one last thing on that, and you're absolutely right. And I think the best that the window is only open so long. The best example of that is we went into last year. Men's golf is a top 5 team, top 4, top 3, top 2 top 1 team in the country, and we saw that window get slammed shut before we could even like look through it, you know?
Yeah, and that's where the that's where COVID, not to make light of a serious situation, but that's where COVID in college sports really bites you in the behind, right? Where you don't
Mhm.
have your seniors, your very good seniors, your developed talent taking that extra year. It's like, I mean, I have no qualms with the guys that left the golf program, going and getting that money, secure the bag.
You already have
That
your degree. Why would you stay to get another one? That's just so much more work, I say.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
secure the bag is the TLDR. Um, but at the same time, you now see a team that is rebuilding. It's not really a reloading. You saw two major, like you said, it's two major contributors left. They don't have immediately obvious replacements, and now they have to not start from scratch. But you even mentioned last week what Hepler was saying, where it's the guys that we bring that we bring on these trips that get the reps. It's not like the guys at home can go out and practice.
Yep.
It's we have to deal with the guys that we have. So
And
anyway, long-winded way of talking about development and timelines and expectations, right?
I was going to say I have one last yin and yang to our talk, framing that in tennis. You say the 2 went out, they got their bag, they got their degrees. Good job, Andy. Good job, Tyler. Think about women's tennis too, just for one more second. Nikki Flores is a senior, and Kenya Jones is back for her like double senior COVID whatever year.
Super senior year.
They might be looking at not the same situation, because they had a fantastic recruiting class last year, and the talent, the freshmen are obviously fantastic, so not too worried about it. But they might be looking at least somewhat similar of a got to replace court 1 and court 2, or your number 1 doubles kind of thing, and that'll be tough. So gotta enjoy it while we can.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about 2 other sports that have a similar dichotomy in terms of expectations. And you also ruined my segue into this. I teed myself up perfectly with the expectations. Baseball and softball. You see the yin of baseball expected to host a regional again this year. And you see the yang of softball, where we're like, I don't really know what to expect. And I bring both of these sports up because we've seen the full schedules now. Just to give like a short overview, baseball will go, obviously, its usual February to May. They go a lot deeper into May than softball does. They start out with an absolutely brutal stretch of NC State and Louisville in conference play. And honestly, I took a brief look through the whole thing. It's just a slog. It's like there's not really a long lull of, okay, you should be winning these games, you should be blowing these teams out, and you should be sweeping these series. It's just every series, every opponent is challenging in its own way, and none of them are absolute dumpster fires is a disrespectful way to say it, but I watch a lot of Atlanta sports and I know what that looks like. So none of them are absolute dumpster fires. On the softball side, everyone is. We've talked about softball before. Everyone is in that sort of same middle meh, competitive ACC coastal. Everyone's the crabs in the bucket kind of deal, other than the top line of Florida State. So what do you think about both of these sports, where they're at, what this season is going to look like?
Yeah, I'll start with baseball because you led with that too. 12 out of the 13 conference teams is a lot of ACC ball, so we're going to be very familiar. And the ACC is primed to have a pretty darn decent year. You got Virginia, Miami, Florida State, NC State, Louisville, Clemson, us. Like, we are going to be seeing good teams. So the fact that, we only get Auburn once this year, and it's the return to Georgia Tech half of the series that we didn't get last year. Those may recall that the last day of
Normalcy.
Normalcy was Georgia Tech baseball closing out a nice win on the Plains. We'll get 2 against Athens. They're never all that weak, but I think they lost some pieces. I haven't seen as much.
They lost a lot of that a lot of their top line starters were drafted. So you're talking about, I think, Hancock and then the second or the 2 pitcher are both gone. So it's not like they're
good riddance.
It's not like they are terrible this year. I mean, they're still ranked in most polls. It's just they lose a lot of that they've lost a significant bit of that top line talent. So I would sort of equate it to that from 2018 to 2019, or like that 2019 to 2020 for Georgia Tech, where they lost so much of that name brand talent, especially in the lineup. I think that's sort of the transition period that they're in.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing about baseball, too, is they're projected to be really good and they have all this talent and they're recruiting like mad and they have a new stadium. But other than, some of the abbreviated season we saw last year, a lot of it is still at least relatively unproven, right? Like
it's a lot of talent on paper. It's all Atlanta sports. It all ties back together. It's a lot of talent on paper. And even the talent that we saw in I don't even think they got 15 games in last year. Like a lot of the talent that we saw at the beginning of last year's season before the rest of it got canned, it was younger, but it hadn't had a massive impact because you saw us get that I think a good barometer for success is always that clean old-fashioned hate series, the 3-game set that we play against Athens every year, because we are similar baseball programs at similar levels of prestige, similar levels of competitiveness in our conferences. And I think they dropped all 3 games. And it was yeah. And the difference between, the usual series and last year was they played all those games in a single weekend. So part of it is you're seeing that same opponent 3 different times, but at the same time, if you're seeing that opponent 3 times in a row in the same weekend, like there should be better results in theory. I don't know.
I'm gonna see that and raise you this. We saw them with a young team that still wasn't like the team that Danny Hall trots out the first weekend of the season and the first 2, I'd say about 2 weeks of the season, is going to rightfully have spots that see a little more rotation. The lineup's not going to be as set. We saw UGA as a relatively young team in the 3rd weekend of the season last year.
Yeah, that was the other thing.
Because the swim meet was going on. The high school swim meet usually closes out the year around, or the month around this time of year, and it was in town. So that was obviously a very young team. You look at, when did Georgia Tech have its best game against UGA in 2019? I'd say it was the SunTrust game, and that didn't happen until May, or at least late April.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see that lineup gel. And I really do mean the lineup. It's not really a pitching situation. It's that lineup. Where are you generating your power? Who steps up? Because it's still a question of who replaces those pieces from the 2019 team. Because we didn't see that ironed out in 2020. Those are still open questions. So
I think the biggest question mark of all of that is that catcher spot, right? There's so much hype, so much talent there, but we still don't know who the next Joey Bart, the next Kyle McCann is going to be, right? So that big hole, there's playing time that can be won at the corners. There's playing time that can be won in the outfield. It's really anybody's for the taking, and that's what makes this team, like, yes, we could say it's really good on paper, but predicting the day-to-day, how consistent are they going to be? How's the lineup going to be? Like, I don't know. We've still never seen a full season of Danny Burrell and how that'll affect the team. It's just very it makes it more compelling. It makes me want to have the season here tomorrow. Well, I mean, I always want the season to be here tomorrow, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like we've been asking these questions for almost 20 months now, you know?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the same exact set of questions that we had last December, last January, when
And
we were doing our previews.
I think the same thing goes for softball, quite frankly, bringing that back
Oh
to
man, you took my segue away from me. I'm
but,
mad about it. I was
but like,
looking for an opportunity to transition, and you took it away from me.
but yeah, I mean, sorry, not sorry, but also at the same time, like, I feel like just like almost bad writing about softball because the same questions I had about last year's team, I have about this year's team times like 0.5 or well, 1.5, times 50%. The maybe that's why I've been doing math all day. Anyways,
Woof.
like I I just don't know like what should the expectation be for this team because we saw glimmers of hey, we almost beat the preseason number 1. We also saw glimmers of this team's a little inconsistent, but where are they going to find the power? Where are they going to find the consistency? These are, I think, pretty valid questions for us to be asking, right?
Mm-hmm. But the thing for softball, I think it's sort of the opposite problem, right? I think it has a lot more questions and we've been saying this for months now. It has a lot more questions on the mound than it does in the lineup. I think because so many of those players from years past have returned. I mean, you still have Brianna Roper. Cameron Sanford is still in the lineup. Trisha Awald is still on campus. Like you have these hitters that have been very good during their time on campus, and that team has not lost a whole lot. But what is going to happen with the addition of Marty McDonald? What is going to happen with the pitchers that they've recruited? What is going to happen with that middle infield talent that they've recruited? That's where the questions are for me. What happens on the mound? Where is that consistency? And we saw some, I think in softball's defense, we saw some of that consistency or some of that raw potential early on last season with Lexi Ray pitching. But it's how, and I think we said it last week too, how does this team gel? How does this rotation gel? And how do they, string together consistently good, consistently solid performances, series over series, weekend over weekend?
Yeah, and all of that is completely valid. One thing, gosh, it was on the tip of my, oh yes, I think the most compelling question about this team is something completely out of their control. Do you want to guess what it is?
How good Clemson is?
That was going to be half of it. I was going to say Duke only has a year under their belt as well. But if you look at it like that, that's a sixth of the ACC that we really have no real barometer for. Like, yes, Duke was surprisingly good for a brand.
And Clemson was hot out of the gate, too.
And I don't know what was in the water in Lake Hartwell, but a brand new team did not deserve to be that good if, knowing what I know about professional expansion franchises slash in non-revenue type arenas. See the first 10 years of Georgia Tech women's swimming or, other stuff like that. They were fantastic. Like, not even like, they're a brand new team, so they're relatively good.
No. They were certifiably good, and I think they are ranked. They're predicted to finish like 5th this year.
Yeah, they are. And
contrast that with Tech, who is predicted to finish 9th, and we're still talking about as like super high potential.
Yeah, I mean, that gets back to the original point that you had when you introduced the team in general. The ACC is kind of just a bunch of question marks after like FSU, Virginia Tech.
It's top line Florida State and maybe second line Virginia Tech, and then a whole bunch of ACC coastal.
Yeah. Well, and I think long term, I'm gonna go big overarching point here. I think that Clemson's starting a softball program and one that's pretty close to our hopeful level of talent this year is going to be a long-term, very good get for this team that just kind of needs a rival, I think. Like, they need a closer measuring stick. They need this is the series that's going to draw the fans. Because, yes, everybody comes out for a UGA game when you're Georgia Tech. But unlike men's football, men's basketball, baseball, or tennis, or even some of like the more established women's programs, like, they have an opportunity to build a you're right up the street and I do not like you kind of rivalry with this team, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's too much into it, but
it's also the fact that I think for Clemson, even though we give Clemson a lot of crap for eschewing any sort of shame in investing solely in football, but I think building, and that goes back to your point about the men's track program. In part of it, I think there was an interview about where it was better explained. But anyway, we have to give Clemson credit for starting a softball program, even considering those, the conditions under which their football program operates. And then two, you also have to, you have to consider, one, the piece that you said, and then I guess 1.5 or 2.5, I don't really know my numbers anymore, that where Clemson in the early stages of their program is aiming is probably just about where Tech is aiming in terms of expectations, where they should be in the conference hierarchy, et cetera, et cetera. Yep. Clemson, as it stands, is looking at that sub tier right under FSU and being like, "Let's go. This is where we want to be. This is where we need to be." There's a power vacuum. Tech should be in that exact same conversation.
Am I allowed to plug a school like Louisville and say they're doing the same darn thing? Like, for the listeners out there that don't know, my sister is a commit to Louisville softball, so I try not to bring
biased.
I don't know, like it's tough to. I've never had to deal with I might have a conflict of interest here in talking about this, but frankly, that's what they're trying to do too, right? It's not, and I guess that's a more established program, so you can say, yeah, they want to challenge Florida State like Virginia Tech's trying to, but also at the same time, like, there is so much of a niche to be a, I guess, B grade softball program. You're not going to be an S tier like FSU right out of the gate. Clemson cannot and will not expect that. Neither should Duke. Frankly, Georgia Tech really can't either right now. But that low A but B, C tier, there's so much elbow room, and that's why everybody has these expectations. Because I guarantee you, North Carolina looks at it and says the same thing, right?
Like, everyone is like, there is a power vacuum under FSU. Who is going to be the second dog?
Even Pitt's putting out stuff of how they're going to compete this year, and I think
woof.
Like 7
just woof
30 something 2 years ago. Like, there's chance for it to be believable, if not plausible.
Okay, just to sort of put the bow on it. Like I said earlier, softball was predicted to finish 9th in the conference in this year's coaches poll. I think we'll probably end up doing a full, preview episode for softball and one for baseball. I think there's so much intrigue and drama in both of these sports that we can talk for ages about, and I think we need to give them the full episode treatment. But since we are deep into stoppage time now, very deep, I will say, let's head over to the main events of women's basketball and men's basketball. I am going to let you take the women and just roll, because I know you have things to say.
All right. They deserve as much words as we've dumped onto at least every other sport, and I feel bad that by putting them at the end, this might tamper what we have to say. But the women's basketball team, if you are not watching them, they're on Tuesday, they're on Thursday.
You're doing yourself a disservice if you're not watching them.
You're doing
legitimately.
They're fun. Almost everybody on the floor is a threat from almost anywhere on the floor whenever they're out there, and they have been fantastic since going off of
coming off of the COVID break.
The state game. That was a pretty bad thrashing, or at least a a handling of this team like we haven't really seen all year. But since they came back from their second COVID break, I believe they're undefeated, and even now they're receiving votes in the coaches poll, which arguably is something they should have been doing all along, given that they're number 22 in the net ranking, which determines your the bracketology over at NCAA HQ. And in RPI, the old method, they're at 18. So yeah, no, go put some respect on them. It's evening games during the week against Syracuse, top 25 team in I think both polls, but definitely the AP. I believe they're 23rd. And Q's is right now probably the third best team in the conference. We should be able to hang with them. If we beat this team, that is maybe not the expectation, but it's definitely plausible. And I would very much like to see it, just as Jake Grant, the sports writer.
It should also be noted right now that Tech sits at third in the conference. Like that is an important piece here. Tech sits at third in the conference behind, the 1 and 2 teams in the nation in Louisville and NC State. And you lock up a pretty nice second tier position if you keep on this roll.
Oh yeah, like a 4, 5, 6 seed, I think is entirely within the realm of possibility in the tournament.
Absolutely. I think the risk here, and you have it noted, is the rotation that they use. Because without Bates, who we talked about last week as she would be back for the next couple of games, but it looks like that ankle sprain was much worse than originally anticipated. So she's still out. But now you're playing a Josh Pastner-esque, like 5 or 6 to 7 woman rotation, which, playing with a little bit of fire there at times, right?
Yeah, at least until Sarah Bates gets back. Hopefully that's sooner rather than later. But even in the season opening press conference, this was something that Nell Fortner noted would be a problem based on their opt-outs, graduations, people on campus or not. Even taking, a walk-on or two more than they had planned. This is a small team. Even in practice, they can only run 2 lines plus a little bit of change. So the flip side of that is, as Ali Love, Loyal McQueen get more playing time, these are great opportunity for young players to step up. But I don't know. I'm going to talk myself into a circle here of the they're good, but they have opportunity to get better, et cetera, yada, yada. But I don't think that changes the point either,
Mm-hmm. And this is the last thing I want to say before we move on, because we only have 5 minutes left on the clock here, stoppage time. It's the thing for me is, if you look at the way that their season has gone, they lost 1 game that they shouldn't have, or I guess they lost 2 games that they shouldn't have. They shouldn't have lost to Athens in retrospect. I think based on the way that program has gone, I don't remember actually looking at the record recently, but they shouldn't have lost that second game to Notre Dame.
The country, Athens is a pretty good team.
Okay, fine. I will take that back. So they shouldn't have lost that second Notre Dame game. That one I am 100% on. They had an acceptable quality loss to NC State, which, fine, whatever. NC State is head and shoulder, like, they're the second ranked team in the country. That's expected. Then they had that questionable loss, like you said, versus Athens. Like, those were their only 3 losses. Yep. And with the state of the ACC in women's basketball is the exact same as the way it is in softball. It's, you get under Louisville and NC State, and it's all funky fresh and coastal chaos, really. So this is finishing out the season, closing out the last, I think it's still like 10 or so games, and getting a really good seed in the conference tournament, getting a really good seed heading into the NCAAs will help this program to solidify themselves as that second echelon, second tier team to those traditional national powers.
Yeah. I think the one thing that is my what if, man, what if, is if we didn't see such an exodus out at the beginning of the Nell Fortner era about what it would look like different in the conference. But you can't, like what if the Elizabeths were still on the team? What if Francesca Pond came back for her Masters? You can't ask those questions because this is still the best Georgia Tech team and the best executing Georgia Tech team we've seen in since 2014 when they last made the tournament, I'd say.
2012. They last made the tournament in 2012.
2012. Wow. I knew it was an even year. Why was I thinking 2014? I don't know. Not
2014
important.
was a good year for other sports.
That is fair. Couldn't tell you why. Go Orange.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think speaking of execution, I think that's a good segue into the men's basketball program. Considering that their execution in the last week of games has been questionable at best, late in those games. I mean, I don't remember if we got a chance to talk about the Duke game last time we were on, but they dropped that game versus Duke very late. They dropped that game versus Virginia very late. Those were winnable games within basically the last minute to 30 seconds, right? And then they come out and put together this performance versus FSU where they did the exact same things. They limited turnovers. They were able to defend pretty effectively and move and shoot effectively. It just, in this Florida State game, they were able to close. But in the other two games, they weren't able to, be as effective, be as well executing in those final situations. And it really makes you think what this program would look like, or what the expectations for this program would look like had they sealed off those two games.
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, I can tell you have had a long week because the Duke game was Tuesday and the UAB tennis match was Friday, and you both asked if we had talked about those last week on the podcast.
Time is meaningless, okay? I don't even know what day it is anymore.
In a more serious point, you're absolutely right about all of those things. I
know how much you hate that I am right in general.
Oh, it kills me. But I thought FSU, we were going to see the exact same thing that we did down the stretch where you played 32 minutes of winning basketball against Virginia. You dig yourself out of the inevitable, wow, we're in Cameron Indoor and it's still weird, even though there's no fans here. You're not like.
To be fair, the refereeing in that game was still a little bit of home cooking, but I
was about to say the coaching staff had a right to be upset about how that game was called in retrospect, but they still clawed it out. But at the end of both of those games, you saw shots clanking, not making layups, poor shot selection, trying to be the hero. And against FSU, it looked like that was going to be the case from early, but you know what the difference is? Jose's hot. Mike DeVoe's hot. Jordan Usher, when he wasn't in foul trouble, shooting the ball and getting good looks. These are not – I don't think a fundamental change happened between the two games. I think the difference was a couple more shots went in. We were maybe a little bit more lucky on an out-of-bound or whatever, playing defensive basketball, paid off a couple more times, and boom, there's your 10-point margin against the number 16 team in the country.
Well, could we call it steal luck? It's not – it's kind of like turnover luck, but similar?
Yeah, I mean, the Moses and Jose are the number 1 and 2 in steals per game in the conference. So when that goes our way, that's a good sign for Tech. And I think FSU absolutely had some very scrappy, smart, quick defensive play. And we know Pastner preaches that. So if this is Pastner ball, I think even with UVA and Duke not going our way, since the Clemson game and coming back from, being on the shelf, we have had quite an entertaining 2 weeks of basketball. And that is more than I can say about, say, 2017-18,
Mm-hmm. I'm just it's been a long time since this program can say it has two competent basketball teams at the same time. And
Yeah.
I'm excited about that. That it's a new feeling. It's a new and uncomfortable feeling to have expectations. And
Well,
I always say it's the hope that kills you, or I guess I've recently always started saying that. But I don't know. I'm ready to ride this one until it ends.
2 p.m. This will come out on Monday, but 2 p.m. today. Uh, for those of you listening to this on Monday, Louisville, Georgia Tech. Louisville's 25th in the country, back-to-back ranked wins. This one's on the road, but again, a lot of men's basketball this week too. They're going to need to win more of these games. Like you
They
can
need to
be
grind out results.
like
That's it.
as good as we know this team is, as good as John Rothstein knows this team is, as good as Passner and the staff know this team is, the NCAA, it takes so much more to get respect out of them in men's basketball, in football, in whatever, just because of who we are. And I don't think that's a ridiculous thing to say. You just have to look at how women's basketball has performed this year at 9-3 in the ACC and only has 3 votes in that poll, right? The men's basketball is going to have to put their heads down and win some of these games to
They're
close.
they're just gonna have to grind out results. I mean, they're still not in the field. It's the Mercer loss still looks bad, and you're looking at maybe beating Duke and Virginia override the Mercer loss, but you're still dealing with that. You still lost to Duke and Virginia. It comes down to how you do down the stretch, right? It comes down to, can you keep the momentum? Like, it doesn't. Moral victories are not necessarily a thing on the score sheet, but can you keep the momentum that you built up during these 3 games, these 3 or 4 games, and the performances that you put up during these 3 or 4 games? And can you do it consistently versus Louisville? Can you do it versus the other teams on the schedule? I don't have that in front of me, so I can't start naming teams off. But can you finish out the season doing these exact same things with the right fundamentals, with with limiting the turnovers, with emphasizing this sort of rangy, wily defense, and hoping at times that it doesn't break down on you? Can you finish is what it comes down to, both in a single game context and in a season context.
Yep. And just to clarify that point, Georgia Tech plays Monday, 2 p.m. against Louisville, and then not again until Saturday against Notre Dame at home, 8 p.m. Georgia Tech right now. Actually, no, I want you to guess. What is our net ranking, do you think?
It's probably still under 60.
55 after yesterday's win.
Okay. That's still, it's not safely in, but it's bubble territory.
Yes, it's bubble territory. It's not safely in. There are definitely more than 13 teams, because there's 32 conferences that probably get in from below us. If you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
this,
no,
right?
no, I understand.
Point being, Georgia Tech is at its highest that we have seen it in the Passner era, in any of these meaningful, in rankings and whatnot. But it only goes so far. So it's time to bring it home. And I think that's the point that we most need to convey. I don't know. Like even volleyball, that year that we all got super mad that they didn't make the tournament or whatever.
Which was last season, more or less. Wow. That feels like a long time ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, continue.
Well, even then, they were at like 70 in RPI, and quite frankly, as much as I wanted it to happen, I didn't think it was going to happen. This is a much more
but I'm never going to admit that in public.
Oh, absolutely. This is a much more realistic shot than that, and even then, they still have their work cut out for them, right? So we need to bank some of these wins, and getting Virginia at home in 2 weekends, or sorry, a week from Wednesday. Wow, I thought it was a Saturday after that. Anyways, getting Virginia on the 10th. That is one you can circle because, quite frankly, they're the best team in the conference right now, but Georgia Tech has shown they can beat them. Georgia Tech could win the ACC basketball tournament at the end of the year, and yes, it would be exciting, but it wouldn't be the, oh my Lord, what happened kind of shocker that it would have been last year, the year before that, the year before that. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think the TLDR here, just to like kind of bring it full circle, is just they have expectations now. They just have to, they have to execute.
It's time to
This is the year, right? This is the window. If it's going to happen, it can't happen next year because you don't have Alvarado. You don't have Moses either. I think Moses is also a senior. It's got to be this year. So figure it out.
I think we just found our title.
It's got to be this year. Figure it out. Oh boy! All right, that I think that about does it. Before we start blathering on about something else, do you have anything else to add?
I mean, I just hope the people appreciate that they essentially got 2 podcasts for the price of 1 this week.
We'll see. We'll see. All right, listeners, thank you all for listening for yet another week, and we will see you again in your podcast feeds very soon.